Alrighty guys, we have a major problem with one of our trucks, and today we're going to take some steps to remedy the situation. Now the issue is with the UglyTruck, and the issue is just that it's slow. My all-wheel drive step side just slaughtered it in the 8th mile, both in terms of 60 foot and the ET. Which at first kind of makes sense because the all-wheel drive truck has an LSA supercharger and is all-wheel drive. It puts down all of its power and it just leaps off the line and it gets to work. Where the only time we had the extended cab at the drag strip, it had a stock torque converter and it had street tires. And between those two things, it took about 4 or 5 seconds to reach full boost with the turbo. And when it did kind of come up on boost, it started to spin. Now, since I have been to the track the last time, I actually installed a Circle D 3400 RPM stall speed 265 millimeter converter. This is a 4L80, and that converter completely transformed how this truck takes off. You know, whenever you plant your foot down, the RPMs are allowed to jump up right into the meat of the power band. That turbo spools up so much quicker. In fact, I love this converter so much, I've bought another one, almost exactly the same for the 4L80, which is now under that pile of glass. For the 4L80 that's going in the all-wheel drive step side. The only difference is I bought a triple disc lockup for that one, because with the 430 gears, I kind of figured at the top of the track, I'd probably lock the converter to gain a few miles per hour. So anyway, Circle D stuff is awesome. I'll show you that whenever we get to the all-wheel drive truck once again. But anyhow, yeah, the converter helped the, can't keep my truck straight. The converter helped the UglyTruck a huge amount, but it did not help the traction problem. Now it just kind of spins the tires. It doesn't matter how fast you're going. You can go 40 or 50 miles an hour. You can nail it. It'll downshift and it'll just spin. So today we're installing some drag radials on the back end. I got a 275 6015, I think they are. It's a ET Street R. But the problem is, these are 18-inch wheels, and the brakes that I have out back here, these are, I really love them. They stop great. They're from a, I think, 2011 Chevy Suburban, and they're a fair amount bigger than the stock rear disc brakes that would have come on this truck. But even if I had stock disc brakes, the smallest you can go is a 16-inch, getting all my numbers confused. The smallest you can go with stock rear disc brakes on one of these trucks is a 16-inch wheel. I'm going with a 15. I chose that size just because there's like more 15-inch drag tire options than anything else. I thought about doing a 17, but I wanted to do a 15. So anyway, we are going to be doing a rear disc brake conversion today. I'll show you all that stuff in just a second. First, I did want to talk some numbers because I'm a numbers guy, and I think the science and the comparison is kind of cool between the 4.8 and the 8.1 truck. So anyway, these are the numbers that we're trying to improve, and my goal is to get these numbers close or better than these numbers. I don't know if we'll be able to do it just yet, but we have a 2.18 60 foot from the UglyTruck, 175 versus the Copo, 867/8, 769 for the Copo. But here's the interesting part. This happened at a drag strip in Idaho that was at 46 or 700 foot of elevation, where this happened in Vegas with 2,000 feet of elevation, I believe. So even though this was at a higher elevation, it was within 1 mile an hour. So this kind of supports my theory that the step side is actually making a little bit more power than we measured on the dyno. It put down 530, this one put down 580. That dyno run went perfect, nothing wrong there. But when the 4.8 LSA made 530 horsepower, we had about 8 degrees less timing than we normally run on the street because we only had 50% ethanol, and because the IATs on the dyno, there's no like airflow to keep the heat exchanger cool. The IATs on the dyno were way higher. So the computer, of course, pulls timing to keep things safe. But even so, it laid down 530 horsepower, but I believe in ideal conditions, it would be much closer to 580, which once again is supported by the fact that their mile per hours are almost identical to one another. So anyway, to get these two numbers down, we need more traction. So we've got the teardown complete. You probably noticed I did remove the diff cover and pull the axles out. That just makes it like a million times easier to get the original backing plates out of there. I have seen guys actually chop these up with like a torch or a cutoff wheel just to save from pulling the axles, because obviously the axle shaft slides through there. But to me, I would just rather drain the diff, pull the axles out, and sure, it takes like 15 minutes, but it'll probably take you a lot more time than that to actually chop up those brackets. And this is a good time to put new fresh fluid in the rear end anyway. So more or less, you want to get it tore down until it looks something like this, just kind of the bare axle housing end. I did leave the original calipers on just for a minute because I don't want to have brake fluid dripping everywhere. And then one thing I forgot to mention earlier when we were talking about modifications that we've done to the truck since it was at the track last, I also added Caltracs, which will help plant the tire, and then the Atomic Fab rear shock relocation kit. I put that stuff on over the winter, and now that we're adding the proper drag tires, this thing is going to hopefully hook much, much better. The brakes that we pulled off, these are, I think, I'm not positive, but I think they're from like a 2010 to 2012 Suburban, somewhere in there. If you check it out, it's a 13.5-inch rotor, which these things did provide really great stopping power. They're matched with the same application brakes up front, but I'm pretty sure these are same from, say, 2005 and newer Silverados. This thing, it stops amazingly, and I'm not going to switch the brakes up front. I know a lot of guys will install like a really lightweight brake setup, but this is a heavy truck, and believe me, this thing is going to be very fast by the time we're done with this. I hate to say numbers, but I want this thing in the 8s. We're going to have a big, massive big block in here. It's going to have all kinds of power. So yeah, I want this thing to run an 8-second quarter mile, so I'm going to keep the good, awesome brakes up front along with the wide tires. I don't really love the idea of those skinny drag racing tires, just in terms of handling and stopping power. But that's kind of a tangent. In terms of the rear brakes that we're putting on, these are actually front brakes from another GM application. So there's still like a really nice ventilated rotor. It has a single piston caliper, but I think, as I say this, I'm probably wrong, but actually no, these are single piston as well. So we're gonna have probably about the same braking pressure, but yeah, the rotor is a little smaller. This one is, I think, 11.5. And I'm not sure on the application, but I'm pretty certain these are from either like a GMT 400 3/4 ton 2-wheel drive. They had 6 lugs, or like a, maybe even a, they might just be 4-wheel drive brakes. I don't know. But either way, they're factory brakes from something. I picked all this stuff up from like O'Reilly's, just generic reman calipers. They're like 35, 40 bucks plus a core. Set of regular brake pads. I got ceramic because I think they'll run a little cleaner. Regular old rotors, although I probably should get these drilled and slotted instead of plain, just to match the front. I'm going to paint these red just to once again match the front, which now that I'm looking at them, they sent me 2 different calipers. One of them is coated, one of them is not. So I don't know what's up with that, but the whole conversion that we're doing is made possible with these brackets that I picked up from 1320wheels.com. I think they're like 130 or 140 bucks. It's pretty simple. I mean, it's just a piece of aluminum with some threads machined in there for the caliper bolts to attach to. But more or less what you do is bolt these guys onto the end of the flange there, bolt your calipers up, and you are in business. So what I'm going to do first, I'm just going to get these, I'm going to get everything mocked up, make sure that they clear my wheels, because that's obviously the whole reason we're doing this. Depending on the wheel that you have, I think I've seen, I forget what brand, but there was one brand, a drag wheel, where the guys had to grind a little bit of the caliper off, but we'll make sure that everything fits before we paint it. I did install this axle back into the housing just because I didn't want it to keep dripping. And even with the axle in place, you can still have plenty of access to all that hardware. So probably what I'll do just to kill some time is I'll get this put back together and glued, or the diff cover glued back up. So anyway, that's basically tear down. So let's get things mocked up. So I don't know why, but brake calipers are like my least favorite part in the world of paint. They're just such a pain in the butt to prep and to scuff and to paint properly. I guess it's not so bad because these are brand new, but I hate brake calipers. But everything fits. I'm not going to show you the wheels just yet because I want that to be a surprise. So we're painting these red. So you couldn't expect us to actually get through a complete installation without making some modifications and making our life a little bit more difficult. But the reason why I always do this with my builds is because in the long run, it's going to make for a much nicer finished product, or at least in my opinion. Now the brakes, the brackets, the calipers, the pads, all that stuff bolts right on, zero modification required. They fit perfectly with the wheels that I chose. Every wheel is a little bit different, but for me anyway, everything bolted right on perfectly. But the one thing I didn't like was how the brake hoses actually routed. If you kept, for example, the driver's side brake hose on the driver's side, it would kind of kink the hose down towards the axle. You'd have to have a really sharp bend. And I just didn't like how it was routed. But I figured out if you flip the brake hoses from side to side, so you have the driver's side on the passenger, the brake lines are like a mirror image of one another. So it actually, that little kink or the bend in the end of the hose works to our advantage. So here's kind of what it looks like. Painted up, I'm definitely not proud of my paint job. I degreased those as good as I could and the paint still didn't stick all that great. But anyway, here's kind of how we're routing the hoses. As you can see, this is the driver's side on the passenger side. It bolts onto the caliper. It routes up nicely towards the top. I went ahead and I drilled a hole in the upper little tab or ear of the mounting bracket, and I put this cushion clamp on there. That keeps the hose mounted nicely so it doesn't rub on the metal or the backing plates or the bolts. And the only other thing that made this install look a whole lot nicer is I actually cut off probably 4 or 5 inches of hardline and I reflared it. And then I welded a little bracket onto the axle right there. So normally the hardline kind of comes up here. And you could make it work, but you're gonna have to do a funky loop or it's not gonna look right. Where now, yep, it did take a little bit more time, but we have a bracket welded to the axle. So it's nice and solid where we have the junction from hardline to flex line, cushion clamp to keep things from rubbing, and then of course just a stock mount down there. And this way, we don't have to bend or modify this little section of hardline like if we kept the original hose on the original side. And that's a big deal because like if we're driving somewhere in the middle of nowhere and we blow a brake flex hose for some reason, because that does happen, but it won't be because anything rubbed through. But let's say we need to replace a brake hose for some reason. This way, all I've got to do is go to the parts store, get an original brake hose. I don't have to bend it. I don't have to modify it. I just bolt it on and go. But I just will have to remember, obviously, that the sides are switched from one another. So that's pretty much what we got to do. Let's repeat the process on the other side. All right, we got tight clearance on the bottom, so a little one of these guys and one of those guys help save your life. Basically, I don't know if you can see it, the back of the socket just about touches the leaf spring. So the little ratchety wrench makes your life simple. Couldn't believe how many times I actually forget to hit the record button when I'm doing something and I have to start all over and do it again. But luckily, I recorded this time. Well, we just did a quick function test and both rear brakes are still working, which I guess, why wouldn't they? But I always like to do that when I'm working with brakes, just kind of test everything with the wheels off to make sure it's all working. Because, I guess sometimes with like a reman caliper, you could get a dud or something like that. But everything went together smoothly, the brakes work, and I got them mostly bled out just with a little hand pump, but I'm gonna have to have the wife come out and help me. Like her absolute favorite thing to do is help me bleed brakes. So we'll take care of that later on, but for the most part, the install is complete. This side did go together just a little bit different, only because the flex hose from the passenger side, which is now on the driver's side, is just a little bit shorter, probably by an inch or two, but we still have the same little bend that clears everything nicely. I still did the same trick with the cushion clamp there. The only difference is out here, instead of the tab being mounted on the spring perch inside the U-bolt, is just a little bit out. But like I said, that's just because this flex hose is a hair shorter, and luckily I had just enough distance on this original hard line on the little straight section to cut it, flare it, and attach the thing together. So that's the install complete. We know everything works, and now it's time to get our wheels and tires mounted. But I'm gonna do that next time for you guys. That is the wheel right there, but that's all you get to see of the wheel until we get the tires mounted up. It is a 15 by 10. We are going with a 275/60/15. That's kind of like, I'm not a drag racer, guys. I'm gonna, I guess, start to call myself that, but I think the 275/60 is like probably the most common drag tire size. So there's a lot of different options. That's what we went with. We'll experiment with it. Maybe we need to go wider, bigger, taller. I don't know. It's a good place to start, in my opinion. Next weekend, though, we are going to take this brand new drag setup to the 8th Mile track up in Idaho. It's like their season opener It's their season opener up there, and I'm excited to see how much quicker we can get this truck. Because like I said at the beginning of the video, I want to get, hopefully, the UglyTruck much quicker to the all-wheel drive numbers, hopefully without adding any more power. I'm hoping just between the torque converter that we installed, the Caltracs, the double adjustable shocks, and the drag tires that we have on here, I'm hoping that's enough to get this truck to actually build up boost and launch and get down the track in a hurry. So I'm excited, can't wait for that. We'll catch you again soon, guys. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, all that good stuff, and we'll see you soon. Said that twice. All right, it's the end of the video. All right, guys, I just got finished editing this video and I realized there's one footnote I probably need to make about the rear axle in this truck. Yes, it's the stock 8.6 10 bolt. It does have a true track in it, but it's the stock housing, stock axle shafts. I did weld the center section to the tubes, but long term, this is not going to be the final axle that we're going to be running. I probably will switch it out for either a 4.9-inch or a 14-bolt semi-floater. I'm not entirely sure just yet. Our final engine combination is going to be making somewhere around 1,500 horsepower, but before we get to that stage, I need to change pretty much everything, you know, the fuel system, the turbo system, all the stuff that we've already developed. So probably for this summer, once I get my billet motor done, I'm probably just going to be running it with the existing arrangement. So I probably won't be making all of my power right away. Over the winter, I'm going to redo everything, including the rear axle. So for now, we're going to continue to run the 10 bolt. If we break something, then we'll address it at that point. But yes, I do know, and I am aware that long-term, this 8.6 10 bolt is not going to be the final axle that is going to help meet our goals of an 8-second quarter mile.